to Northern Kentucky History Hour. If you're joining us on Facebook, welcome. If you are joining us via Zoom, we're just going to let all of our friends into the Zoom and then we will get started momentarily. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. Again, if you're just now stepping in, thank you so much for joining Northern Kentucky History Hour. We are just letting all of our friends into the Zoom meeting and we will get started. We are also recording this on via Facebook Live. And so if you ever want to return to this or any of our other Northern Kentucky History Hour events, you can do that by going to the BCM Facebook page or to Behringer-Crawford's YouTube channel. All right, looks like we've got quite a few guests with us today. So thanks for your patience. Oops. Still have quite a few coming in, everybody. So I'm just going to wait until I feel like we've kind of got most of who we're going to have. Okay. And again, if you're just joining us, welcome to Northern Kentucky History Hour. We're so glad to have you all with us tonight. It's a beautiful May day, this 47th episode of Northern Kentucky History Hour. Looks like we've got quite a few folks in our Zoom meeting and quite a few already on Facebook. So we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Tara Johnson-Noem and I will be your host tonight. We're so glad to have you with us for this project of Behringer-Crawford Museum. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of Behringer-Crawford Museum, and we want to make sure to thank the staff of the museum, my fellow board trustees. Some have asked, I don't work for the museum, I'm a trustee and a volunteer. So very thankful to the staff to make this happen, and thankful to my fellow trustees for trusting us to host this on a weekly basis, at least for the next couple weeks. We are also very grateful for our financial supporters. Behringer-Crawford Museum is supported by the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, the Kentucky Arts Council, the Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, and the Carol Ann and Ralph V. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation. And we're also supported by our members. We have almost reached our goal of 50 new members as a result of History Hour over the last year. And so if you joined, thank you so much. If you haven't quite made that leap yet, you're welcome to go to bcmuseum.org and find out how to do so. Just a couple of housekeeping items. I do see a few new names on our list tonight. So glad to have you. You will notice that your microphone is muted. And we just do that for the respect of the speaker, but we definitely still want to hear from you. So if you have a question or if you want to share a story about Devou Park, we encourage you to do that. You can do that by, if you're on Facebook, you can put a note in the comments, or if you're with us on Zoom, you can put a note in the chat. And then I take notes throughout the presentation and I will ask any question that you have or share your comment during the question and answer period at the end. So look forward to that. Also, just a reminder, we are recording this, and even depending on the device that you are using, if you're joining us via Zoom, even when the screen is being shared, sometimes on a device you can't see anybody else, but some devices you can. So just keep in mind that if your video is on, we might be watching even if you can't see us. So just always want to let people know that. So anyway, without further ado, I am actually, I do want to tell you guys one other thing. A little bit later in the chat, I am going to post a survey. And this survey, if you've been with us for a while, you might have heard me say this last week, but I am retiring from this volunteer job at the end of the month. I'll continue to do my day job, but we are working with the museum to determine what's next for History Hour. It will continue, but we just want to make sure that we're getting it right. This is a good time of transition to make sure everybody thinks the time works and everything. And so I will be posting a survey. We've had a few people take it so far, but if you haven't had a chance, there's just a couple questions. And we would love it if you would let us know, does this time work for you? Does the day work? What kind of topics are you looking for in the future? That kind of thing. So if you wouldn't mind, just take a second after the presentation, of course, you don't want to miss what Janine has to say, but go ahead and use that link, please. I'll post it here in just a bit. Okay, so that said, Janine, do we have a quiz tonight?
Yes, we do.
Awesome. Okay, guys, if you're new, you might not know about our quiz. Janine will ask a question. I'll try to reiterate it in the chat. You can answer if you're on Facebook also, if you're watching live, of course. And if you are the first correct answer, you will win, in addition to bragging rights, your own BC Museum Northern Kentucky History Hour pin. So super cool. And, you know, yours truly will write you a little note and say congrats. So if it takes me a couple weeks, I'm sorry, but I will get it to you, I promise. So good luck on the quiz. So get ready to type fast. It's a tough crowd out there. Let's see here. Okay, so I am so pleased to introduce you to someone who I kind of feel like has become a friend over the past year. I'm proud to say that. And her name is Janine Kreinbrink. She is an archaeologist and president and senior archaeologist with K&B Cultural Resources Management. She's a board member of Friends of Big Bone, a past board member of the James A. Ramage Civil War Museum, and archaeologist associate at Behringer-Crawford Museum. Let's see, she has done a number of projects around Devou Park, and we have kind of been saving this toward the end of our year. And so I'm going to hand it over to Janine. Janine, welcome again. Welcome back.
Hello, thank you, Tara. All right, let's go ahead and share the screen here. Get the History Hour PowerPoint. Well, back up there. All right, everybody can see that? Tara, you can see that?
Yes, it looks good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read some of this, and some of it I'm going to talk to the slides. Doug VonStrohe, my work partner, and I had written an article that was published in Northern Kentucky History magazine that has a lot of this information in it. And we also had done a separate cemetery research project in Devou Park. And so we're going to be kind of combining both of those to get us through the next hour. So we'll start at the beginning. So Devou Park currently has about 702 acres on the west side of Covington. And in 1910, the Devou family donated 550 acres that formed the original Free City Park. And we're going to talk a lot more about 1910 forward next week. So we're going to go back way before that tonight. So in 1910, when they donated the property, the 550 acres came from 41 separate parcels of land. And we'll go into a few more of those next week. But this week, we're just going to talk about a few of those parcels. And the first one we're going to talk about really is the biggest one, and it encompasses everything. So this large shape here, here's the Ohio River. Covington's over here. Cincinnati's over here. And Devou Park is somewhere right about in here. And it goes down the hill all the way to the river. Here's Ludlow, right over here. We're going to come back to this slide. So we'll get ourselves oriented a little bit more. Here is the current outline of the park with the black line around it, I-75. And there's a stream that used to run through here called Willow Run. And we'll come back to that shortly. And the big bend coming up around here to Ludlow. And this is Pleasant Run Creek coming in over here on the left. And that'll be important as well. And here's just another view of the same thing, showing the hills, and the golf course here in the middle, museum right there, the overlook over here. And this is Sleepy Hollow Road. And we can kind of divide Devou Park into west of Sleepy Hollow Road and east of Sleepy Hollow Road, some of which will be important later. All right. So a man named Prettyman Merry, and Prettyman was his first name. It was the maiden name of his mother. He was a resident of Virginia, and he received 2,000 acres in Virginia Treasury warrants. They were adjoining parcels in northern Kentucky, and they were put together to make one parcel. And the bad handwriting on this map here, this is turned sideways. We'll look at it right side up in a minute. Here's the river, and that's that line I showed you on the first map. And it reads, March 10th, 1784, surveyed for Prettyman Merry, 2,000 acres of land by virtue of two treasury warrants, 523 and 893, entered May 9th, 1779, laying in Fayette County, which is the original county, on the Ohio, beginning at 3 sugar-teries, corner to Cave Johnson, about 5 miles below the mouth of the Licking, thence so much distance to a sycamore and an elm, etc., etc. Back up the Ohio to the mouth of a branch about 1 mile below the mouth of the Licking fence, and that is Willow Run. Poles with Peachy's line to the beginning. And that is the description of the meets and bounds. And so we've got A, B, C, and D. We have A, B, C, and D that lays out that property. And here it is turned with north to the, sort of to the top. Here is north going that way. So here's the river. This is Pleasant Run right here. And this is Willow Run running north into the river. This is just an image of one of the original land warrants. This is for one of the 1,000-acre land warrants that we were able to find. And here is the land grant overlaid onto the topo map. And here's Willow Run, or where it used to be. And here is Pleasant Run. It doesn't quite match, but that's Pleasant Run. And then it kind of went over that way. And here is Sleepy Hollow Road coming through here. And obviously the park is just this part right here. All right, now I'm going to read a little bit while we look at this map, which is going to bring us to a court case that happened. But we're going to sit here for a few minutes while I talk about Prettyman Merry. All right. Based on later court records, and we'll get to that in a minute, Prettyman Merry and his son John cleared bottom land in Ludlow, Bromley by about 1797. A stone house there is attributed to them, and it's the Merry Stone House that's on the National Register. His house is mentioned but not described in the federal court documents that placed Prettyman Merry at his house on January 3rd, 1797, when he struck a land deal with a man named Thomas Sanford for 1,000 acres, or half of Mary's 2,000-acre land grant. Thomas Sanford, who was born in 1762, reportedly served on the Virginia line in the Revolutionary War Continental Army. However, that service and his rank are still ambiguous. Some have reported that he served as a lieutenant. Others stated he was a general, most likely because he was called that in later documents. James Taylor called him a colonel in 1805 on the occasion of Sanford's second marriage, which we'll get to. Only 2 references have been found that may document Sanford's Revolutionary War service. Both of them list a man named Thomas Sanford as a private on the Virginia line. I don't know which one's which. A biographical entry for Sanford's grandson, John Leathers Sanford, described Thomas as follows. He was a farmer and large landowner. He was a general in the militia, a member of the convention, which framed the first Constitution of Kentucky, and also a member of Congress. As Sanford was born in 1762, he would have been a very young man during the Revolutionary War. And it's more likely that he was a private during the war and became a colonel and a general later in the Kentucky militia, as his grandson's biography suggests. Sanford was in Newport as early as 1792, served as Justice of the Peace. He was a representative from Campbell County for the Second Kentucky Constitutional Convention in 1799, was involved in state level politics. And he had been married once before to a woman named Sally Redmond. They married in Virginia. They had a child named Alfred, a second child named Alexander Pope Sanford, who was born in Covington. And they moved to the Ludlow area down in the bottoms soon after the deal with Prettyman Merry. Now, Sarah died in 1805, and she's now in Highland Cemetery, and after a long journey through multiple cemeteries. 1805, later in November, Thomas married a woman named Margaret Bell from Northern Kentucky, and they had one son, Cassius Bell Sanford, who was born in 1807. Now, Thomas Sanford accidentally drowned in 1808. He was moving a flatboat in December, and his body was not recovered for 6 weeks. He and his first and second wife had been buried in the Craig Street burial ground in downtown Covington. They were then moved to Linden Grove, and then later moved to Highland Cemetery, where they are now buried up there in Highland Cemetery. Their son Cassius was the mayor of Covington in the early 1870s, and he's also buried at Highland Cemetery. Now, during this year or so after Sanford's death, his widow and his son and Prettyman Merry, who was still alive, knew that there was no clear title for the land. Merry and Sanford had done like a kitchen table deal. So they had set up a land contract, and the Sanfords were paying Merry some money every month for the property, but they never entered the deeds at the courthouse. And that becomes a huge issue very shortly afterwards. So around the same time, and if you look at the map now, back to the map, you see this dashed line here that comes from the river, and it says Samuel Beale grant claim, and the bigger parcel here is Prettyman Merry's. Almost every piece of land in Kentucky has competing claims very early on. The surveyors were maybe not that good. They gave out multiple land grants that ended up overlapping in multiple court cases, and we were very lucky to be able to find this court case. Was filed and stored in Atlanta at the Regional National Archives down there. And so we have a big stack of papers that we got from this court case. So Samuel Beale had claimed 1,000 acres with Willow Run as its eastern boundary. Based on later documents in the court, the grant was assigned in April 1780 and surveyed 1784. And it lays completely inside Prettyman Merry's grant. So Merry filed a case, that's case number 359 in U.S. federal court against Samuel Beale and other members of his family, claiming that Beale had fraudulently surveyed the 1,000 acres, and Beale, of course, claimed he was a lawful assignee, and it took 6 years in the federal court until 1815 when they ended up settling, and here's a survey showing all the different permutations of all this. And remember, Sanford had already bought and had been living on this property since 1797. So they end, if I can get my arrow to work, here's all the different competing claims. And here's what they ended up with. So anyhow, it took till 1815. And what ended up happening is Sanford ended up with the shaded areas with the final land boundary, and Sanford's house was down here in the corner. You can't see, I'm pointing at the screen and you can't see it. Here's Sanford's house, and we're coming up the hill, and this is the park over here. Merry kept this part, and Beale ended up getting the part from the hill down to the river. So here's the road coming out from Covington that would bring us into Ludlow, and all going up that hill ended up belonging to Beale. So this allowed Sanford's heirs to claim the Ludlow River bottoms and all of the upland from Willow Run area all the way over to here. This court case is amazing. There's all kinds of depositions from James Taylor, all the other local Covington guys who were around at that time. Fascinating bits of information included in there. So that settled the case for Prettyman Merry's title, and then they had to go back to court to get title for the Sanfords, and that took until 1819. So another 4 years of what they ended up with to get their title to the land so that they could start selling the land. Because remember, she was widowed with small and teenage children, and it took them until 1819. So after that, they started selling off some of the property, and the area that we're interested in, they did not sell until 1831. April 10th, 1831, the Sanford heirs sold about 393 acres to a man named Joseph G. King. All or most of this acreage is in the park. We know very little about Joseph King, except his wife's name was Eliza, and they lived in Campbell County, and that's about all we know. Until 1838, when the Kings divided this piece of property, and on November 23rd, 1839, they sold 220 acres to a man named William Montague, I think Montague Road, and 154.5 acres to James M.T. Eubank. And we know Eubank because he built the brick half of the Behringer-Crawford Museum. And so now we've brought it up to names that we recognize. And let's see where we're going from here. All right, this is just overlaid onto the topo map. Whoa, go back. So if I can get my mouse, where's the mouse? There it is. So here's the park over to this side of Sleepy Hollow Road. Civil War sites in here that we're not going to talk about because we already did, and the bottomlands. All right, so the rest of the talk, now we're overlaying this onto the park map. So here is this, the red line marks Sanford's property that he ended up with, and the black line is the park. Well, we're going to talk about a few different pieces here. We're going to talk about the Rich family. There's a Rich family cemetery over here, and we're not going to talk about the Civil War sites again tonight, but just keep in mind that they're over here. We're going to talk about Montague. We're going to talk about Eubank, and we're going to talk about St. Mary Cemetery. And we're going to have to fly because it's already almost 7 o'clock. All right, so the Riches, this arrow points to the Rich family cemetery right there. All right, so Prettyman Merry, I think, sold some of this property to Rich. Some of it they bought from King. I don't have that deed in here. And they held on to it through the family. So we go through the different pieces of the Rich family until they sold 34 acres in October 1878 to William Devou Jr. And that'll bring us up to the Devous for next week. In the meantime, so this small graveyard is located west of Sleepy Hollow Road, and it's been known as the Riggs Cemetery, the Bates Cemetery, or the Rich Cemetery. We first surveyed it in 1981 and 1982, and this map that shows one grave marker base and a limestone grave marker is from 1982. None of these were still there in 2012. When we had gone back to check, we couldn't find any grave markers. This Virginia grave mark, Virginia, wife of Simpson Riggs, she was a Rich, and she married Simpson Riggs on December 20th, 1845. She died in 1846, so they had not been married a year when she died. She was only 19 years old. This marker was brought up to Behringer-Crawford Museum around 1970 and had been found presumably over on this side of Sleepy Hollow, so we think it came from this graveyard. And this is a view of the cemetery now, or recently. It's pretty much overgrown, but it pretty much in this open area here, over near the apartment buildings. The Rich family had been there by the 1790s, and they farmed and raised cattle over most of the hills west of Sleepy Hollow until they sold it to the Devous. All right, so now we're going to go back to the main part of the park. And if you look at the map, if I can get my arrow to work. All right, here's the museum. Get us oriented. There's the museum. Here is the golf course clubhouse area, which is where William Montague's house was. And this is the Eubank property. And this black line here that is divided into 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is the Montague. It's part of the uphill part. All right, and we're going to go to the Montagues first. All right. So we'll keep you oriented here with the map. And we have 4. All right. So William Montague and 4 of his siblings, Cave, Montague, William, Elizabeth, and John, moved to Boone County, Kentucky in the 1790s. Their father had died and their mother came with them. And so they all had bought farms and property in Boone County. And William had married a woman named Polly in 1800, and they had 6 children. Cave, who died, Elizabeth, Thomas, Maria, Virginia, William, and another Polly, and we'll come back to the children. He was a minister in the Bulletsville Baptist Church, and he served that, and I love this quote, he was a Baptist minister until about 1820, but then, quote, the spring of 1819, he went into the organization of the Sandrun Church. In this church, he labored for a few years, and then being seduced by the novelties and sophistry of Alexander Campbell's system, slid into the current Reformation. In other words, he quit being a Baptist and he joined the Church of Christ. And in doing so, he left Boone County and they moved to Covington. In the meantime, Polly passed away, probably soon after the birth of the daughter, Polly, in 1819. He remarried in 1823, and we're going to come back to his second wife. Her name was Nancy Moss Brown. And if the local historians out there on the Zoom, on the Facebook, might recognize the name Moss, because Keturah Moss Leach Taylor, who was David Leach and later James Taylor's wife, was a Moss. Nancy was her sister. So Keturah and Nancy were sisters. And we're going to talk about Nancy here in a few minutes, because she's also connected to the Eubanks. So it's all one big happy family, or complicated anyway. So there's the 1809 with the wills and the probates and the court case, and then Joseph King sells the acreage to William Montague. All right. So William Montague had 6 surviving children. Well, some of them died without any children. Cave and Pa didn't have any children. So we have Elizabeth, who married Alan McCoy. Thomas, who was married twice. Maria married Charles Henry Hayes. Virginia had no children. William Jr. married a woman named Zerelda Vickers in 1854. And Polly married a man named George Light in 1840. So we'll keep ourselves oriented here with our map. So they had 4 children who had children, right? Elizabeth, McCoy, Thomas, Maria Hayes, and William Jr. All right. So now let me come back over to here. William Montague died in July 12th, 1842. He had written his will only the day before. Very interesting will. He is presumably buried in the Montague Cemetery, which is behind the tennis courts, and I've got an image of that here in a minute. His son Thomas was his executor. He divided his property into these 4 parcels, lot 1, lot 2, lot 3, and lot 4. He also freed the only enslaved person that they had, whose name was Armstead, was freed in the will, and he provided care for a woman named Mariah, who had been enslaved, but it said in the will that she had been living as a free person for many years, but directed the children to take care of her after his death. All right. So his widow, Nancy, got dower rights to the house, which was down here where the clubhouse is. Is part of lot 3, which meant that William Montague Jr. had to take care of his mom because he got lot 3. Lot 1 went to Thomas. Mariah Hayes received lot 2. William Jr. got lot 3, and Polly Montague Light got lot 4. A son-in-law, Alan McCoy, got money to take care of the grandchildren because the daughter had died. Thomas Montague very quickly sold all of lot 1 to a man named Peter Gibson. And we'll come back to that. Now, and we're going to get back to this little area right here as well in just a little while. All right, so the trivia question, lot 4 was known by another name early in the 20th century. What was this hill called? Because this part of the family never sold any land to the Devou family. They kept it until it was developed into the houses that are there now, earlier in 20th century. So that's a trivia question. What was the other name for this area over here that's outside the park? All right. So let's talk about a few other little tidbits here as we come after 7 o'clock. This picture shows a house up here, and it says Shelter House Refreshments. And this is that house. And these children are standing at where the museum is now. So this was either Thomas Montague or Peter Gibson's house. And for those of you who've been around a while, there was a water tower in this location. Whoops. There was a water tower in this location for a long time. 4-way stop is over here. The band shell is now over that way. But this house was destroyed by a tornado in 1915. And we just did a few little test excavations up there late last fall on top of that hill and found a lot of brick. So we're confident that the house site was definitely up there. All right, so this is just an image of the Montague Cemetery. Not much left there. There's a stone square out there and a few limestone markers. Here's a view of it. Here's a closer up view. You can see the square. We believe that William and his first wife is buried in Boone County, so he and Nancy are probably buried inside this square. All right. So this is just Louisa and her brother started purchasing land 1867, 1860, 1872, and they bought the 41 tracts, including all of these. We'll talk about that next week. All right, so James Eubank, he bought his 154.5 acres, and he built the brick part of the house somewhere in the early 1840s. All right, so William Montague married Nancy Moss Brown January 23rd, 1823 in Covington. She was born about 1774, And she died sometime after 1842, because after he died, she's listed in his will, but she's not in the 1850 census. So we don't know exactly when she died. She was Keturah Moss Leach Taylor's sister. Her first husband was named Archibald Brown, and they were married about 1791. Had a daughter, went by many different names: Maria, Mariah, Anne Marie, Mina. She was born about 1795. They lived in downtown Newport. Maria married James Taylor Eubank, June 2nd, 1813. Now, James Taylor Eubank was James Taylor's nephew on his father's side. His sister was Eubank's mother. Now, Eubank unfortunately died December 1814, and Mariah had a son, James Moss Taylor Eubank, January 1st, 1815. So just 2 weeks after her husband died, she had their son, James Moss Taylor. Now, Nancy Ann served as his guardian for most of his childhood. And the same day that his grandma and William Montague bought the 222 acres on top of the hill, James purchased 154 acres right next to it. And this is the picture of the Behringer-Crawford Museum before the reconstruction of the veranda and everything. So you can see that this was a brick federal farmhouse, center door here. The hipped roof and all that was put on later. But anyway, that's the original part of the house that James built. So he just bought the property right to the north, so he could be next to his grandmother, who had taken care of him all his life. He married a woman named Sarah Dempsey in 1840. They had one son. He was quickly widowed. She died sometime within a year or two. And he married Mary Ann McCoy December 1842, and she was William Montague's granddaughter. All right, so they're not related to each other, but it's kind of like his second cousin. So they had 11 children, all up here in the house. James and Mary Ann McCoy sold their land in 1867 to Louisa Devou. This was the first property that they bought up there and they bought the house. They sold 2 tracts of the land to Louisa Devou, February 1867, and they moved to Illinois, and James unfortunately died December of that same year. These are 2 pictures of Mary Ann McCoy. I could not find a picture of James. Presumably, I guess they didn't have one made before he died, 1867. These are obviously from later in her life. She lived until 1909. And here's her photo at age 83 on the right. And that's James's grave marker from Illinois. Pretty much the whole family moved to Illinois after they sold land. Okay. So now we're going to talk about 10 acres in the middle of the park. And this will be our last section for this week. All right, so let me get to my cemetery stuff, because this is all very, very interesting. We have lots of other information on the Eubanks and the Montagues, all their genealogy, all the census records and all that. We just don't have time to go into that much detail. So St. Mary's Cemetery was a 10-acre Catholic church, formal cemetery that was in the middle of what's now Devou Park. And if you look on the map, here's Behringer-Crawford Museum, and here's the 4-way stop sign out in front, and that's that little rise sits out in front. This, you can see it down here. And there's this little parcel right here that's 1.86 acres, and then there's this bigger 8.14 acre. So this made up the 10 acres, and they were part of Montague Lot 2, owned by the Hayes family. So the Catholic Church bought 10 acres of land in 1850 to use as a cemetery for St. Mary Church. Based on deeds and other historical information, We're confident that this is the cemetery situated in the immediate vicinity of the four-way intersection on Montague Road. I don't think I put the deed history in here because it's mostly just one bishop transferring to another bishop. But they bought it from Maria and Charles Henry Hayes in 1850. They first began talking about it, and then the deed was finalized in July of that year. The cemetery was opened in that same year. Later in the year, there is a dedication. It's actually listed in a newspaper for dedicating the cemetery. And then it's transferred amongst various bishops. In 1867, the bishop, who was the bishop at the time, was George Carroll, and he sold the 8.14 acres here to the Devou family. Now, we're presuming that's because nobody had been buried in there yet. And the timing works out because in 1870, they opened St. Mary's Cemetery out on the Dixie Highway in Fort Mitchell. And they had realized, I guess fairly soon, that this was going to be too small up there on the hill. They had nowhere to go because the Devous were starting to buy the surrounding land. So they didn't have any way to expand. And so they bought the property out on the Dixie Highway in Fort Mitchell, right there at the Fort Mitchell interchange with I-75 now. And they closed this cemetery. And so in 1867, they sold 8.14 acres to the Devous. The church retained the 1.86 acres, presumably because people were already buried there. And we have evidence for that we'll get to in a few minutes. All right. In 1900, the Diocese of Covington sold the remaining 1.86 acres to the Devou family. And this is a hand-drawn sketch that somebody from the diocese went up there and made. And it says, this document notes Gertz, who's the guy, and I have this transcribed, 10 or 12 tombstones still standing and recorded a date of 1864. And here's the text. The above measurements are not accurate, for I only stepped off the various sides. There are yet about 10 or 12 old tombstones standing. Latest burial, according to tombstone records, July 1864. No fence in front, yet it is fairly well protected by posts and brush. Fencing of sides in poor repair. No sand has been hauled away. Devou sand pits are about 100 yards distant. A great part of the accumulated rubbish and underbrush have been gathered into piles ready to burn within the past month. The county road leading to the cemetery is about impassable. Mr. Devou cannot desire this for any other purpose than to square his farm, as this cemetery is just a slice cut out of it. The ground is very rough and hilly. It's thickly planted with all kinds of trees and brush. The only person to whom this ground could be valuable is Devou, for his house is hidden by the cemetery, which acts as a kind of scarecrow for the very fine farm. And that was the handwritten quote. All right, and this is the location that you're looking at here. This is from the museum, and there's that kind of rise, and then the four-way is here. And so the 1.84 acres is pretty much like that. We found no formal record of advertisements about moving graves. And there are advertisements because in that same time period, they moved Buena Vista Cemetery on 26th Street in Covington to start Mother of God Cemetery. And there are advertisements in the newspaper for people, descendants of people buried in Buena Vista Cemetery, to come and move graves. We could find no mention for St. Mary's. Research at the current St. Mary's Cemetery has identified at least 61 persons who may have been moved from the old St. Mary's Cemetery to the current one in Fort Mitchell. And one of my historic archaeology classes at NKU, a couple of the students got really interested in this, and they literally went through every record at St. Mary's Cemetery. They sat and read every book, and we've got a spreadsheet with lists of names. And they say, hold on here, they say things like removed from the old cemetery. And there's another one just says the Tierney remains removed from the old cemetery. And then other people's names. Another one says moved. But anyway, we have 61 names of people that we're pretty sure were moved at some point from the cemetery. No burial records have been found from the original St. Mary's Cemetery. We've not found a plat of the grave lots. We've not found any lists. And St. Mary's, current St. Mary's has no list. And the diocese archives don't have any records. All right, in 1912, between 1910 and 1912, William Behringer, and we're going to come to that, notes a grave marker with an 1872 date, which means that even after they quote unquote closed the cemetery, people may have still been burying up there because they'd already paid for the burial lot. It's very likely that there were hundreds of people buried within the 1.86 acre parcel. And it is very probable that there are still, I've lost my mouse completely, that there are still burials up there in the park. I've lost my mouse. Mouse, there you are. All right, so it's very likely that there are still burials in here. All right. So this is a postcard. That same one we saw earlier, only William Behringer is drawn on this one. And if you see this line here, all right, and he says, hold on. View east from the Devou home to the house shown on page 15 in his journal. The road is new built in 1910. The ink line denotes the abandoned Catholic cemetery. So he's saying here that that is marking the cemetery as he saw it. Here are two more postcards from his same journal. And he says, these two views are about the same. X is the county road. X. The county road called Montague Road connects Ludlow and Lewisburg. So that's, and this is the four-way stop, a little different than now. And this is the road down to the lake. And here it says Devou house over here. The straight line, straight ink marks on these pictures denotes the outline of the Irish Catholic Cemetery, about 4 acres in extent, 600 feet long, 400 feet wide. I can't read that one. Early ones were buried. His spelling was atrocious. He means were there instead of where. Buried, and at the earliest date I seen on stones was 1848, the latest 1872. At times they dug out remains in 1910. They leveled off the wild tree growth and stones. Also the road was put through it and bones scraped in the ditch to make the road. Where the horse is in 1913, I saw several bones laying here. So this is the area he's talking about. And here's the museum. So between 1910 and 1913, William Behringer documented what he saw up in the park. And it's been fascinating. And here's just some pictures of my students out there. We were doing probing, trying to find evidence of graves, and here's the area again. We found it very interesting that there are no records from the beginning of the park that mention the graveyard. We tried to find records in Covington, and of course they don't exist. We found it very curious, though, that one of the people on the original board, Covington Park Board, that set up Devou Park after the donation, a representative of the Bishop of Covington was on that board. And we just wonder if maybe he was on that board because of the cemetery. So we don't know. All I've told everybody is I think there's probably still people buried there. And I've been hoping to maybe get some kind of a marker out here before we stop. Is right behind the shrubbery. So very interesting, big mystery. I don't know. All right. Join us next week. We're going to start in 1910 when the Devou family donated the land. And this is one of my favorite cartoons. Grump was a guy who was a cartoon character that was in the newspaper. You know, the cartoonists did all kinds of cartoons with Grump. And this was on the occasion of the first Covington Municipal Picnic. And he says, I never thought they'd do it, but they did, finally. And so he's going, even Grump goes, hikes to the picnic. And so we're going to take the hike up into Devou Park as it becomes a park next week. And that's it.
Awesome. Wow, Janine, I have a bunch of questions.
Okay.
Some of them we can keep till next week maybe. We did have a couple things. Let's start with the quiz.
Right.
So you talked about different lots, and lot 4 did not become part of the park, right? And so it had a name. What was the other name for that area?
Lights Hill.
It was
so somebody
Lights
named
Hill.
Sage got it.
And Joe Geraci. They both got it. Lights Hill.
Yeah, I figured Joe Geraci.
Very cool. Well, congratulations to Joe and Sage, and I'm writing your names down. So well done. I will just say incidentally, Janine, that at some other time, my husband Shane's grandmother was, her maiden name was Light. And so I'm curious to know if she has any relationship to
It's very possible
Light.
if she was from Covington.
Yeah, she was. So, okay, so let's get to our questions. I do have one other note regarding the quiz. From a past quiz, I sent a message, but I didn't get a response. So Charlie and Barbara Jacobson, if you want your button, I need you to direct message me in the chat with your address. So anyway, we've tried to get those buttons out, everybody. Okay, here's the first question. Hold on, where is it? Oh my goodness. Well, okay, I'm going to go to actually kind of a non-related one for just a second. One of our viewers, Amy, was mentioning that they have an old cemetery on their street in Boone County, Gaines Way. And she was just curious if you know anything about it. And if so, we'll connect you to and you can chat.
Yeah, connect me. I'm not sure, but I can find out if I haven't been there. I've been to about 70 Boone County family cemeteries.
I had a feeling that yeah, he might be familiar to it.
I did a survey to help Boone County document some of them a long time ago, and it's very possible that I've been there, but if not, I can tell her how to find more information on it.
Perfect. So
Okay.
Let's talk for a second about the Mary Sanford land case. Kim is wondering if the court records are available to the public anywhere.
They will be. Yeah, well, National Archives has them in Atlanta. With COVID, most of the National Archives has been inaccessible for a year. So
that
you
makes
can't.
Research challenging.
Oh, yes, and terribly challenging. You can't go there. Still, they're mostly working from home, so even they haven't had access to their own stacks of data. We have copies of all of those, and I don't think I've taken them to Behringer-Crawford yet. Covington Library, I talked with them about getting them scanned, and then they would be on file in Covington.
Very cool.
So that's our goal.
That's the goal.
Once they are available, then yes, they will be accessible.
And then thank you. And then here's an interesting question from Mr. Zimbrodt. What did Devou do to accumulate the cash necessary to buy? all that
Okay.
land.
So it's kind of two different questions there. So the Baptist minister is Montague, and he had the money because he'd sold his property in Boone County. So they had bought, he and his family with their mom had come in the 1790s and had bought a bunch of property in Boone County. I'm sure it was cheap. And when they sold that property, then Montague had the money to buy. And there may have been money from Nancy as well, from her side of the family. Devou's family owned, I don't know what you call it, dry goods shop, millinery. They sold ribbons and accessories and all kinds of things like that, fabric, fans, women's accessories for making clothing in downtown Cincinnati. And that's how they had the money. The Devous had the money to start buying. And we think they started buying the property on top of the hill because they had lost several siblings to tuberculosis and typhoid and other diseases like that. And they wanted to get out of the city. And so that's when they started buying the property. What kind of tile is on my fireplace? I don't know. This is my office in Florence, and I don't know. I would love to think it was Rookwood, but I don't think it is. This house was built in the 1920s.
Very cool. Did you see the note about Devou? Oh, no, that was just to me. What is the status of Devou Park getting onto the National Registry?
Oh, sorry. The Civil War part of the park, we got listed 2 years ago.
Oh, I don't think I knew that. Cool.
All the part west of Sleepy Hollow Road is on the National Register now.
Nice.
That was the original goal when I've been working on it for 25 years. And when we finally got permission from Covington about 4 years ago, they said, well, you know, if you're going to put the Civil War part on the National Register, can we get the whole park listed on the National Register? And we'll talk about that next week. But yes, we wanted to get the whole park, but it's like two parts, right? So you have the west part that's Civil War, totally unrelated to the park that starts in 1910. And we sent in the National Register nomination with everything in there. And National Park Service came back and said, split it up. The Civil War part's a shoe-in. And so that was not a problem. The rest of the park, they felt that the addition of the Dries Pavilion, the new golf course clubhouse, and the additions onto Behringer-Crawford took away from the original design and setting of the park. And so the Park Service turned us down for the main part of the park. And we're going to talk about that next week as to why we thought the rest of the park should be on the National Register. It all has to do with park planning and all kinds of really fun stuff. Somebody want to know general store or a dress shop? It was a store. It was a commercial. They did wholesale to millinery shops, but they also sold direct, as far as I know, all kinds of accessories.
And so, just to be clear, I mean, people were making their clothes a lot at this point, right? So they would buy the fabric and then they would make it. So
right, yeah,
just
ribbons
to make sure,
and all that, lace and everything. Yes.
Yeah, because they would make their own clothes at that point.
Sure.
So, okay, just wanted to clarify for those who might not be familiar with what one would do with all that fabric. So,
all right.
Cool. And just to be clear, can you just explain what the National Registry is? Because I don't know that all of our viewers know what that means.
All right. 1966 National Historic Preservation Act set up the National Register of Historic Places, and that's a list where you fill out an application to get your property listed as a historic site, and it can be locally significant, statewide significance, or national significance. It doesn't have to be nationally significant to be on the National Register. You just have to make the case. And there are 4 criteria. that you can use. One is it important historically, like, a Civil War battlefield? Is it associated significantly with an important or significant person who is important to the history that you're talking about? It can't just be George Washington slept here. It has to be significant, like Mount Vernon, for example. 3, is it an architecturally significant building? Really good example of an architectural style. And the 4th one is for archaeology, and that is, can it tell us something interesting and significant about the past by, the archaeology, by something below ground as opposed to a building. So those are the 4 criteria. And so that list has been set up since 1966. The form's gotten a lot more complicated in the last, 50 years, but that's the whole purpose of it. You have to have the landowner's permission to list something on the National Register. You can't just put it on there. You have to have the landowner's permission. It is an honor. It is not a legal protection. People think it is, but it's not.
Right. It would need to be locally designated in some way, right? For it to be like a legal protection, typically.
Yeah, you'd have to put a deed easement or a deed restriction on it. There are some protections in historic districts because they're set up, kind of like a homeowners association. They're set up with rules for the properties that are in the districts.
Cool.
For things you can do and you can't do. But if you're out in the country and your house is on the National Register, you can bulldoze it if you want. I mean, it's,
like you said, it's an honor.
Right. It's still private property.
It's a great way to catalog things that, like resources and assets that we've had. So I just wanted you to explain that because I know not everybody maybe is aware of that. Okay, so I know we're a little bit over time. Just one quick question for you and then one quick question for me. So the question for you is, did Devou have a manufacturing facility in that local area?
No, they were not manufacturers. They were distributors.
Cool. And so then
they bought and sold.
Gotcha. And then the question for me was, can I repeat how to get to the survey? So normally at this point in the presentation, we would talk about next week, but as you guys have already heard, we're going to have Janine back next week, and she's going to talk about the rest of the history of Devou. So please come back for that. And then I would like everybody to fill out this quiz. So, okay, hold on, that didn't work out. If you look in the chat, if I can, I guess it's, hold on. Trying to copy and paste from the chat, and apparently that is not a thing that I can do. Sorry, hold on one second. If you go back up into the chat just a little bit, you'll see a note that I made at 7:21 p.m. that says, please take a moment at the end of the program and let us know your thoughts. You can click on the link and it will open in a new window. So as we end tonight's presentation, for those on Zoom, please take our very quick survey. It'll just ask you a couple questions. We really appreciate your time and really look forward to seeing everybody back next week. And if you are joining us on Facebook Live, I'll post the survey on Facebook as well. So definitely want to make sure that we hear everybody's voice about this. So have a great night, everybody. See you next week for more about Devou Park. See you. Thanks, Janine.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.